Hello, all collective listeners. On today's episode of the Samson Strength Coach Collective, we have Damian De Santiago. He is currently the Director of Basketball Performance for Abilene Christian University, a very good program out in Texas. It was great talking with Damian today. I thought it was really cool to hear different things like how it was to watch Damian Lillard work out when he was at Weber State, how much he gives back to the program. I mean, that's one of the best basketball players alive. So very interesting to hear that. And then encompassing different things like his time at Texas Tech, learning the Charles Poliquin principles, working with people like Dave Scholes and Joey Burgles, and then encompassing a lot of different things that strength coaches have to do. Things like working as a dietitian, understanding that you maybe have to be even a director of ops at certain points. So I thought it was a fantastic conversation. Damian's one of the best guys I know, so I think you guys will really enjoy the episode. Enjoy. How are we doing today, collective listeners? On today's episode of the podcast, we have Damian De Santiago. He is currently the Director of Performance for Basketball at ACU, which is Abilene Christian University. How are you doing, Damian?
Doing good, man. How you doing?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Always good to talk to you, man. You know, I miss you.
Oh yeah,
We worked together at Texas Tech. He was the assistant men's strength coach while I was there as the women's coach. So we spent a lot of time together. Damian's a fantastic coach, and that's that's all I'm going to hype you up for. All right.
I appreciate that though. I appreciate it.
Of course, of course. All right, Damian, why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners? Give us a brief background on your history and strength and conditioning, and then what you're currently doing now.
For sure. So my name is Damian De Santiago. I hail from a very small town in the Upper Panhandle of Texas called Booker, Texas. Probably about 1,200 people there. Not a whole lot to do there. Was there for 18 years of my life. I ended up getting a scholarship to actually play college football at a small school up in the Northern Panhandle called Wayland Baptist, which is kind of where I got really introduced to strength and conditioning and just organized sports and all that, or organized collegiate sports, that is. And I was kind of getting my feet wet a little bit in the strength game a little bit. Was there for about 2 years, decided that it kind of wasn't for me anymore. We all kind of know how that road goes. You get there, you're just not good enough. You're like, man, I really got to figure out my life now. But
It gets different.
it gets very different. But I did that for 2 years, decided to transfer to Texas Tech. I just wanted to be a regular college student. It was nice. Did my undergrad there for about 3 years. And I really didn't get back into strength and conditioning until my graduate program. So it was my last 2 years there. I decided to start interning with the Olympic side first. And I was there for 6 months. I was able to learn under Tori Stevens, Katie Munger, Tyler Cook, DJ Clark, a bunch of great strength coaches. And they really helped me build kind of a foundation of knowledge as far as just understanding what to do, what not to do, how to program for different teams, how you shouldn't always program like a football team or, this, that, and the other. I was there for 6 months, and then I actually got moved over to the football side for about a year and a half, where I was under Coach Scholes, Brandon Howard, and a bunch of those guys, Joey Burgles too. And honestly, that's probably where I really got a lot of my skin in the game and actually understanding how intense it can really get and how much pressure it is when you actually start working with revenue generating sports. So that was about 2019 going into 2020. Was there for about a year and a half. It kind of gets a little muddy because the whole COVID thing happened, and obviously everyone gets laid off, and we all know the mess that made of everything. So, kind of got laid off in a sense. I mean, as an intern, you're not getting paid, so it's like, hey man, we can't bring you back. It is what it is. So I was back home. I was chilling, just wondering what I was gonna do with my life. I was like, man, trying to graduate, trying to get this graduate degree. And sure enough, I got a call sometime in April about a job at Weber State to take my first basketball job there. And so I took that. I was able to learn under Coach Ray, who is the head coach of Weber State. He's, I think, the all-time leader in wins in Big Sky history. Dave Merrick, Jorge Ruiz, as far as basketball staff goes. Also learned under Derek Rosinski, too. He's the head football strength coach at Weber State. Great guy. Love him to death. But yeah, that's really where I got my real start in basketball. I was always really a football guy, but basketball really always kind of interested me because it's just like a very different environment than football, and it's very more kind of it's just a smaller unit that you got to worry about. With football, you got to worry about 100, 150 guys or whatever. But did all that. Was there for a year, did a decent job there, and I actually got a call back to come back to Texas Tech to take the assistant basketball job, which obviously is where you and I met. And was there for a year, was able to learn under you and the great Darby Rich too, and everybody in between. So we had a good year. Went to the Sweet 16. It was very fun. Had a very good time. And ACU calls the next year asking me if I wanted to come be the director of strength and conditioning. I said, heck yes, let's get it. I can stay in Texas. It's right down the road from Texas Tech. It's cool. So I'm going on my second year now here at ACU. It's very much been a blessing to be a part of the staff and a part of this program. But yeah, man, I'm just trying to figure it out day by day. You know how it is. So
That's quite the storied history, though, man. I love it, and I
I
think
appreciate it.
that's especially for your age and to be able to be at all these locations. I'm sure there's a lot of experience that comes with that, and a lot of quick learning.
Oh yeah.
Having to catch up quickly on those things. So, well, yeah, there are a couple things that pop in my head just from hearing your story. The first is, as a basketball guy myself, obviously I'm very involved with the draft process, understanding where kind of the NBA stars come from, potentially smaller schools. So what was it like working at Weber State, knowing that's where Damian Lillard came from? I know he's pretty involved still with the school. What was that environment like for you?
Man, it's cool. He actually, so he has this deal where he comes to Utah every summer. Like it's very much a regimented thing he does every year. It kind of got weird because of COVID and the bubble happened, so he kind of came a little bit later in the year. But I was actually able to kind of sit down and watch him work out because he'll stay there for about a week, week and a half, and just the community that comes around like that type of player, even when they're like out like done with college basketball and they actually come back and visit, like it's a different environment. Like it's very much like very family oriented, which I thought was really cool. Dame himself is just a super humble guy too. Like doesn't come from a whole lot. He's just a super humble dude. So just being around him and understanding like the work ethic it takes to really maintain a body like that and just be able to compete that high of a level was just amazing to me. Like this guy was training about 3, 4 times a day. It was structured. It was planned. It wasn't always just like go, go, go. It was very much like, here's your time for basketball. Here's your time for your training. Here's your treatment and all that. It was just very regimented, and I was just very impressed by how disciplined he was with that. And just being around him, man, and being around his trainers was a blessing because these guys go through things that you wouldn't even imagine, man. I mean, they're balancing their own life, they're balancing their sport, trying to pay and feed their family. Like it's actually insane. So just being around that and just kind of being exposed to it really kind of opened my eyes to really what it takes to get to that level. And it's tough when you get freshmen in because they're coming from where they're the big man on campus or big man at school. They get to college level, and it's just a whole different game, and it's really hard to get them to really understand like what it takes to be professional, even overseas. Like those type of guys, they put a lot of work into what they do.
Mhm.
So just learning all that and just kind of taking that and trying to instill that into my players, just hey man, like y'all have no idea what it takes, but I'm gonna try to get you there. But again, it's just a process that you really have to fall in love with, and that's just something I try to preach for my players and what I learned just kind of being around Dame Lillard in that aspect. So
For sure. And I mean, it's just funny you say that. We had our first lift with our men's team yesterday coming back from their summer break. One of our freshmen just looked at me towards the end of the lift, just, out of breath. And he just said, "Man, that college work is different." I said, "Oh,
I
yes. You,
put
you
them in the
already
spin
know."
cycle. Put them in the
Yep,
spin cycle.
exactly. So, and do you feel like that helped elevate your players' work ethic as well? I mean, especially
Oh
like
yeah.
that combo of Phil Beckner and Dame, like they're very much known. I feel like as like the hardest working trainer and player duo.
No, absolutely. I'm telling you, the guys see a guy, NBA guy work out, they try to emulate everything they do. Like these guys were very locked in. Now, granted, that probably lasts for about a good month because attention spans are very short, and
Mm,
obviously life hits. So, you get really good engagement involvement that kind of first month or first kind of go around. But you start to kind of see who's really about it though. Once the dust kind of settles and it starts getting hard, and you really understand, okay, these guys know what it takes to really reach that next level. And you just
that
hope that those guys just kind of that behavior just trickles down to the rest of the team.
absolutely. It's just like when you're late in season. Who are the guys
Oh
who are going
yeah.
to rise to the occasion when stuff is
Oh
hard?
yeah.
It's easy to be the loudest one in the summer workouts.
Oh yeah.
It's
Everyone
not
looks
easy
good
to
in the
be the loudest
summer.
one in practice. Yeah.
That's facts. That's facts. That's facts.
Okay, and so now I'm curious as well. We have the same similar history from switching from football to basketball. What are kind of the biggest things that you had to change with your philosophy transitioning to basketball from football?
Yeah, a lot more just understanding that they can't take the same amount of, I don't want to say load or volume, but football just has a very larger strength reserve, just built up from their whole time lifting in high school and even a little bit in college too. You get transfers and all that. So it's a little different because you're getting basketball players at a very young training age, which can be kind of tricky because you want to make sure you're still building all this muscle and getting all these adaptations that you just get with, any other strength exercise. But there's that learning curve of actually learning movements like hinging and squatting that's kind of tough. So it's just a little different. It's just kind of like getting just a new baby deer coming in every single year. With football players, you get guys that just have been clean their whole life. They've done CrossFit, they've done Olympic weightlifting, wrestling. They just have a very large training background. With basketball players, they've been hooping since they came out the womb, and that's all they've known. And then you get these guys from other like kind of impoverished communities where it's definitely all they've known. Like they literally pick up a basketball, go out to the court outside, and that's it. So just kind of adjusting that and just kind of not dumbing things down, but making things a lot simpler in teaching movements and just making sure that the language I translate the movement to them is something they can understand.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it just gets it's different. You understand, you get it, like
For sure.
yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
but like what you're speaking to, about access and the, ability for players who don't have the resources to play basketball versus something like football.
Yeah,
Football, you got to have what, 22 guys, right? You got to have pads, you got to have everything like that. For basketball, you got to have a ball and a hoop.
that's it.
So
Yeah.
it's completely different. I agree. I definitely noticed that trend as well. A lot more guys who come up, they don't have the resources to train. They're just people who are trying to make it via this sport. So it is. I think the baby deer analogy is fantastic. That's a,
Oh
that's a,
yeah.
a lot of what it is. I was just
Oh
trying
yeah.
to train these guys as much as possible.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
Thanks. Mm.
Okay, and so well, now let's dive into your basketball programming a little bit now with your team. I mean, now this is fourth year working with basketball, correct? Full time.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, excellent. So, what are kind of your biggest, I'll say, points for your training program? What are the things that you really implement and make sure that you want to have your players at a high level in your program?
Got you. So, uh, usually week 0, week 1, and I'm starting from like summer. I'm not really counting the whole like spring time because it's just springtime. So usually when summer comes around, I don't really do any sort of like movement screening. Really, I basically kind of use a front squat to kind of gauge where guys are as far as their movement quality is, their mobility, and all that. So usually I start very simple with just front squat, RDLs, overhead pressing, chin ups, things of that nature. I keep it very simple. As far as my ideology, philosophy, I try to take things from a lot of different programs. If I stuck to really any system or really put my program into any system, I kind of do like a bastardized tier system in a sense. I feel like we all do. But that's kind of the framework of my programming. So usually I'll have the guys come in day 1, we'll do some freehand front squatting. And that week 1 is kind of just me kind of gauging how they move. I just prescribe very simple movements, very simple rep schemes and volume and load. I just kind of see where they're at. Usually returners are obviously going to have a larger training background with me, so it's a lot easier for me to expedite the process with them kind of later on as we get further into the oncoming weeks. But really, I just kind of start there, and then I really just start loading them from there. I really like the 5 rep range, especially early on in teaching, because one, it just gives you it allows you to do more sets and expose them to just a lot more just volume, because I feel like every set you can kind of recalibrate and understand, okay, you get coached, here are the coaching cues, you need to fix this and that, okay, apply it to the next set, then apply it to the next set, then apply it to the next set. Before we know it, we're doing 5, 6, and eventually hopefully building up to maybe sets of 7, sets of 8, things of that nature. So week 0 through like 1 to 2 is just a lot of me gauging how they're doing. I keep it very simple. I try to supplement my sprint work where I need to. We'll do a lot of like 10-yard starts. We'll do a lot of kind of absorbing plyometrics where you're coming down from altitude, absorbing, getting in a good position, and then maybe we'll start progressing to maybe doing a squat jump after that, and then do more reactive plyometrics as we kind of get into it. Do a lot of extensive plyos. I'm a very firm believer of just doing extensive plyos for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then progressing into intensive plyos. For the listeners, extensive plyos is basically like jump rope, pogos, just repetitive things, not super stressful things that are going to tax the system, but things that are going to make sure that the tissue is adapting the way they need to, the Achilles and quads and all that. And then you start getting into the depth jumps and trap bar, reactive jumps and all that stuff. So I really wish I gave you a much clearer definition of my programming. It really just changes from year to year, if I'm being honest. I really try to meet my guys where they're at. I could have a full program set out, and week 1, these guys are just out of shape, don't move well, and I just got to scrap the whole thing and just kind of go off the whim. But it's very interesting because basketball makes you really kind of think outside the box in a lot of aspects. So I really just try to make sure my guys are taken care of and just make sure they're moving good the whole time. So
No, for sure. I think that was a pretty clear picture of your program.
yeah,
I only asked because we got our lift later on today, so I just wanted some ideas. That's all.
yeah.
But
Hey, yeah, you know where to
okay.
find me.
Hey, no, I know, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, all right, and so just knowing your background and the places that you've been, a lot of your roles have ended up being not only strength coach, but also dietitian, sometimes director of ops number two, a little bit in that situation.
Oh yeah.
I mean, can you talk to us about balancing those roles, specifically from a dietitian standpoint? Because I feel like for most strength coaches, that is kind of something that may be lacking. I feel like schools are not necessarily caught up on a dietitian or nutrition department standpoint.
Yeah.
What are some things that you've done with your team, and then what are some things that you really feel were important and that helped you be successful in that role?
Gotcha. So yeah, with the nutrition aspect, a lot of mid-major coaches know, man, you kind of just get thrown into that. You have zero background in nutrition, and really you just gotta go off the seat of your pants. Biggest thing I could say is just research, research, research. That's the biggest thing. Try to keep them on trends and to a certain extent. Try not to follow diet fads, and make things super simple for the guys too. A lot of these guys are just used to, eating one meal a day, hooping for 8 hours, eating one meal later at night, and that's it. Like you really have to create a regimented and structured plan for these guys. Now you don't need to sit down with each guy and outline, hey, you need to be eating this, this, and that. But you need to kind of make things a little bit more universal in how you approach things. So one thing I've been doing lately is I've been labeling a lot of stuff, and I actually got this idea from Texas Tech and Dana McCutcheon, where we say I have like a Belvita biscuit little place where I put the Belvita biscuits at or whatever. I try to make sure guys understand, like, okay, if you eat this, I'll label it as quick energy, because obviously Belvita is a carbohydrate. It's going to be immediate access to just quick energy, and that's it. And obviously they think, okay, Belvita, quick energy. Okay, gotcha. Carbohydrates equals quick energy. And so they're kind of learning, and you're making it simple on them, and you're just kind of taking the thinking aspect out of it. And over time, things just kind of become habit, habit, habit. And these guys really start to understand, like, okay, if I eat this, this will help my body in this way or that way. So labeling's been a good thing I've been doing. Also, just like, and I didn't talk about this earlier, make sure you're building real relationships with your players, because you can have the greatest weight training program, you could have the greatest nutrition program imaginable. But if you cannot explain to your players why this is going to help them get better, and you don't have a good relationship and you can't really speak to them in the language that they understand, it will not mean anything. They'll maybe say, like, yeah, I'm doing this, but they're not doing it. And then you can actually have those hard conversations like, hey man, you're kind of gaining a little bit of weight. Hey, you're looking a little small. Hey, I'm trying to get you healthy. We gotta get better, man. Like, what can I do to help you? So biggest things, relationships, making things easy on guys too. Try not to overload them with too much information too. Like, some guys can't even spell carbohydrate. Don't even know what protein is. Like, try to make it as simple as possible, man. Like, I cannot stress that enough. But and you really got to ask for help too. Like, don't feel like you need to go it alone. Like, ask dietitians you may know, ask even support staff too. You never know. Ask the lady at the nutrition shop, the smoothie shop, like, hey, you have any recommendations on smoothie recipes or anything I could do? So those are good. A lot of it's just like man work, man. You gotta maybe make shakes if you don't have access to core powers, and then you gotta start ordering core powers, and that's when you start getting to the whole operations aspect of it too. Then you have to start worrying about the catering and the food and the timing of the food, where is it going to be at, and then that's where you start kind of delving into the operations and just like the stress of that. And that's where I'm really tight with my support staff. I really think that you really need to have a good relationship with your staff as well. So just having that help from the support staff just kind of helps mitigate any kind of issue you might have with the operations aspect of it. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I mean, I'm out here making shakes as well. I understand how
Oh
that
man,
can go. But I mean,
man,
when you do these things for these players who haven't had stuff like that before, it does go into that relationship building aspect, like you talk
absolutely.
about. I mean, like they lose their minds over this stuff,
Oh yeah.
and I know our guys really appreciate things like that. So I'm sure y'all's do as well. And so, that was something I also wanted to bring up with you. I know that one of your strengths is absolutely relationship building, and developing buy-in from the weight room. What are kind of your key points? What do you really look for in building these relationships with your players?
Gotcha. Just ask questions, man. Be curious. Ted Lasso said it best, man. Just be curious. Like, I feel like strength coaches kind of get caught up in what's on the sheet and the numbers and wins and losses, this and that. Which again, you should worry about that 100%. But when it comes down to really getting to know somebody, it's just like you just gotta don't get too personal. Let things happen organically. You can't really force anything. Like, it's a terrible idea to be like, hey, first time you meet someone, like, hey, how's your relationship with your father? Or like, hey, tell me about your trauma. You kind of got to ease into these topics a little bit and just kind of like it's like peeling an onion, like layer by layer by layer. And some guys got a lot of layers, man. And I will tell you, it's taken me some time with a few players to really build that relationship. But just ask questions, be curious, be considerate too. These guys are also human beings, and they want to be treated as such. I feel like a lot of strength coaches have a very authoritative or disciplinary kind of resolve to them, and they kind of come off as a dictator in a sense. Yeah, there's a time and place for that, but there's also a time and place to kind of be a mentor and really be a person that these guys can really lean on for anything. So you really just want to make sure that you're just there for guys when they need it. And again, any opportunity can come up to start a relationship or build that relationship. You could have not any sort of contact with a guy for maybe 1 to 2 weeks or any way that you feel like you should, and maybe they might come at you out of the blue with a very deep question and some very like deep problems. And you're like, man, like I got you. Like, let's talk about this. You can't shy away from things like that. I feel like those are uncomfortable situations that you really kind of have to embrace. So you really have to just really embrace kind of being uncomfortable with certain situations, understanding the balance of being able to, you know, ask certain questions in certain situations, avoid certain questions in certain situations. So it just comes down to being a good person, man. Just care about them. These guys are your livelihood. At the end of the day. But I treat these kids like my kids, man. Like I truly do. Like I really truly love every single one of my athletes. I would do absolutely anything for them, and it shows in my actions too. Like you said, when you're making the shakes, when you're doing all these things and going the extra mile for them, these kids do appreciate it, man. They might not say it, but like deep down, they really do appreciate it. And doing things like that, just making sure you making them know you care, it can go miles, man. I'm telling you, it's crazy. And you understand that too.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's like you said, it's the smaller moments that pop up that can kind of mean the most out of nowhere.
Yeah,
Like I have a player who I've always thought we had a good relationship, but it has been superficial. It's always been,
yeah.
oh, what do you think of the new Gunna album? Like smaller things, just like trying
But
to
those are
build
those
rapport.
are also good things, like good points to like kind of build on too. Like music,
Absolutely.
like stocks, you can talk about anything, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
But then I mean, one day I was making a mistake actually, funny enough, and he was standing by me, and he's a quiet dude in general. And then he kind of just turned to me. He's like, "Yeah, like things aren't going great with me and my girlfriend right now." Like, and I was just like, "Whoa!" Like,
yeah,
it kind of caught me off guard because like
yeah,
we just have never had a type of conversation like that. But like even just him opening up to me in that brief moment and us talking about it, I mean, it was probably about 3-4 minutes, and I kind of just gave him some advice of what I've done with my relationship and what's worked for me. And like you can just see how that develops into the weight room and how that really gets them to buy in more into your process as well too, right? Because if they do have this deep care for you, or you have the deep care for them and they know about that, then they'll really be willing to do anything for you. And it also makes those accountability moments much easier as well too, because
absolutely.
you're not somebody who's just coming at their neck. You're somebody who cares about them and wants to see them do better. So you're not going to accept the lower level work or the lower quality work that they're trying to produce in that moment. I want to see you do the best. I want to see you be the guy who's like Damian Lillard coming back and showing out for all the guys in college right now. Like I
Yeah,
want to see you do your best. So I'm not going to accept that low level work.
absolutely, absolutely. It's actually one of our pillars. We have 4 pillars we live by in the ACU program. First one's always going to be build relationships. The second one is going to be consistently communicate. Third one is consistently hold each other accountable. And last one, obviously, you got to compete. So those are the
Mm.
4 things we live by. We feel like they build into each other. So again, man, relationships is probably the most important thing in coaching, in my opinion, if I'm being truly honest. Relationships.
Absolutely. I agree. Maybe because I'm not the best programmer and I'm better at
Hey,
developing
that's true.
relationships,
Hey,
but hey, you never know.
hey, good people skills can mask a shitty program. So
Oh,
yeah,
for
we're
sure.
good. Yeah, we're good.
Absolutely.
We're
Absolutely.
good.
So, well, and then I am curious about this too, because I am a younger male within this profession as well, working with the men's team. I've noticed times where that relationship can go a little too far into the casual zone, right?
Yeah.
And so, what are some things you do to make sure you keep that balance where it is a relationship where you show you care about them, but it also doesn't go too far into that zone where you may be losing that kind of coach athlete relationship?
Yeah, that's kind of how you carry yourself. Again, you want to kind of use the advantage of how close you are in age to these players, just to kind of relate to them a little bit better. But it's really how you carry yourself too, with like confidence and maturity. Like there's a time and place to crack jokes, this and that. But like when it's time to work, it's time to work, and you have to be very firm on when it is time to work. And if guys start to joke around too much, you have to step in. You have to be firm. You can't let that compromise anything. Like it's a very tricky balance, and you obviously understand that too. It's just you just gotta know when and where, man. When and where is the time to play around, when it's time to work. So again, let's try to be firm when I can. And again, it goes back to the relationships, but there is a line that you cannot cross. Like
Mm,
obviously going out with your players and like doing too much outside of the weight room and outside of the program. Try to limit those interactions. Now, maybe there's some situations where that's allowed and okay, maybe at the professional level, maybe that helps. But again, you just really got to be firm in certain aspects and not be afraid to call guys out on their BS when you need to, and not be afraid of guys like even maybe talking back to you, you know?
mm.
And again, that's where you kind of, again, that can actually lead to some respect in certain aspects too. So,
For sure. I feel like to me, like the best relationship with the strength coach and athlete is a love hate from the athlete. You
oh
know,
yeah,
if
oh
you
yeah,
love me all the time, I'm probably not doing my job. I'm probably not
facts,
pushing you to the standards that you want to be at.
facts.
Okay. And so, you know, we've also discussed some other things with your programming. I know a big thing that you're looking for in this off season is potentially doing more of your SAQ work before practice. Can you kind of
Yes.
walk me through that thought process and, you know, the process of actually implementing that for your team as well?
Yeah, so this past year, we kind of had issues with warm-ups. Not like a crazy issue, but in season warm-ups just get very repetitive. And over time, it's just like you're doing the same thing. And, guys aren't locked in, and it can kind of lead into the starting practice very slow. And so, I kind of talked with my head coach after the season. We kind of talked about like, hey man, like we need to, kind of ramp up the warm-ups a little bit. Like, here's some ideas. Like, you kind of let me know what you think. And I was really kind of thinking, I was like, okay, how can I make things as easy as possible from a weight room aspect and from doing all these SAQs and stuff? So I decided I want to keep the weight room the weight room. Anything we do in there, it will be like using load. We won't really do a whole lot of sprint work. We might do some loaded jumps, but if we're in the weight room, we are getting right into our A series or our compound movements, and we're getting right into it. I'm not a big believer in Olympic movements. I've used them in the past. I think there is merit to them in certain aspects, but I'm not really married to the idea. So I try to do a lot more athletic based movements very early on too, just establish some sort of like, just a base level of athleticism with certain guys. But anyway, so my whole thought process was, okay, let's keep the weight room the weight room. We're just gonna do all our compound movements, just get big. That's it. And I decided to move that SAQ time to kind of our latter part of our warm up. So we'll do a regular dynamic warm up for about 5 minutes. I actually convinced my coach to extend the warm up so we can actually fit the SAQs in this. So we do a regular dynamic warm up for about 5 minutes. And depending on what we're doing that day, whether it be offense or defense, I try to kind of correlate it with what we're doing SAQ wise. So if it's like an offensive day where we're getting up and down, I try to do a lot of my sprint work. If we're doing a more kind of a defensive intensive day, that's kind of where I do more of my change of direction work. And so we'll have our little 5 minute warm up session, and then we get right into it. I assign groups, and we're really just competing the whole time, which I think is just a big thing you need to have very early on in your off season. Just establish, hey, we need to learn how to compete on a daily basis. And so we'll do that. Like I'll walk you through week one or day one. So day one will be our kneeling starts. And so I'll have three guys up there, literally just down on one knee, knee over toe, driving off that front leg. And we'll do that for about 2 to 3 weeks, maybe progressing like falling starts or maybe even some resistance sprint work. It really just kind of depends on where the guys are at. And then day two, again, will be kind of a more defensive intensive day. We'll do our change of direction stuff. It could be a shuttle. It could be, T drill. You can maybe do some curved or figure eights or, whatever the case may be. And then Thursday, because we practice Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, our Thursday, I try to make it a little bit more engaging. I kind of leave that as a time to maybe do something more fun, like maybe we'll do tic tac toe, where guys will run from across the court to half court, drop a cone or a ball somewhere, and then guys are just kind of going back and forth. So it's kind of like a strategic aspect too, and it's a little bit more engaging on the mental. We might do tag. I brought the football out sometimes. We run routes. It really kind of depends, but I've found it's created a lot more engagement early on in practice. Like, and my coach has found he loves it. He absolutely loves it, especially when you start throwing competitions in there. Hey, coaches, eat that stuff up, man. You know how it is. And so,
The final pillar, the fourth pillar.
oh yeah, fourth pillar, man. Got
Yeah.
to consistently compete. So, yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing. I'm still kind of playing around with it a little bit, but I have found it allows me to do a lot more in the weight room. And then you're obviously kind of killing two birds with one stone with one, getting them primed for practice, and two, doing all your SAQ stuff, speed work, change of direction, and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, you've inspired me with this conversation to kind of reassess our warm ups because I agree with you. Like that's something that can get flat very quick.
Yeah,
And so what I've done in the past is I've even just taken like three separate warm ups. Like, one's more of like our guys really love static stretching, and so
yeah,
start with the static stretch, then go to dynamic, and then go from there. Another
yeah,
one's just a purely dynamic day. Another one's more of like a sports psych kind of day, like deep breathing or anything before we
yeah.
go onto the court. So I still, even if we have three different ones, those three still get tired, and they
Yeah.
still
Oh
get
yeah.
bored with it. So I think that's a really good way to look at it and a good way to switch it up and make it more engaging for your guys. And I'm glad to hear that it is working out,
Oh yeah.
because obviously you set the tone for a lot of the stuff you do for practice, right? Is making sure
Oh
you get
yeah.
a good warm up. If it's not good, then it is potentially, leading into a bad practice. And
Oh
also,
yeah.
I talked about it on a previous podcast here, and I think I've even seen you post videos about this, the strength coach a lot of time is the thermostat, right?
Oh yeah.
You're the one who
Oh
sets the
yeah.
temperature, and the head coach is as well too. And so if he sees guys kind of taking warm ups easy, it doesn't look very good. That can really kind of set up practice for
Oh yeah.
thermostat for the head coach as well too. So
Oh yeah.
I think it's a really good way to look at it.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I guess I do think there's this idea that everybody says, well, it's college athletes, like all they want to do is compete, But
Mhm.
to be honest, I haven't seen a lot of that with my teams, like on a really really consistent basis. Like
Yeah.
there's maybe out of a team of 15, like 8 to 10 who are really strong competitors, and then possibly around like five who don't really care that much about the competition piece. What
Yeah.
are some ways that you really try to make sure that they understand the importance of competition and they also buy into that competition aspect?
Yeah. Well, when you do competition, it's always good to kind of attach like I don't want to say a punishment, but like if you lose, like hey, we got 10 push-ups, And over time, guys realize, like, man, I'm gonna stop doing these push-ups. Like maybe I should actually start like trying to win. We also try to group guys with. I try to group I don't know how to say this, lower competitive guys with high competitive guys. That way, those high competitive guys can really like actually push these lower competitive guys to like, hey man, like you got more in you, like let's get it. So just trying to kind of make sure you're grouping certain guys together where they need to be. I really don't like using punishment too much. It is what it is, but it really comes down to just make sure that you have great leadership and that you are communicating with your leaders like, hey man, we got to get this guy to where he needs to be. And then it's kind of more like a mutualistic effort to between me and then like the leadership and the high competitors. Like, hey man, we got to get these guys up to speed. Like, what can we do to make this better? And then heck, we might even bring that kid in. Like, hey man, it's not good enough. Like, you're not doing good enough. And again, like I said, it goes back to the relationship aspect too. What kind of relationship you have with all those players where you can have conversations like that. Because those are tough. When your character or your competitive nature comes into question, guys can be very defensive.
Oh
And
yeah.
even when you have a picture in your head of what a competitor is, they have no idea what it is. So a lot of it's just like ignorance. They just don't understand like really what it takes to compete at this level. And some guys can pick it up quick, and some guys really they don't stay in your program very long if they're
Hmm.
low competitive guys. So those guys eventually do get weeded out. I hate to say it, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast. And it's like you get with the program or you're kind of out of it. And as like you know, as crappy as that sounds, it's just kind of it is. It is what it is. It's straight business at the end of the day. So
It's a fact. And,
yeah,
at the same time, like we talk about at a collegiate level, if we're looking at a pro level, like it's even more so. If you don't
yeah,
step up to the occasion, like my first speech, first day of the year for our men's team is, how many of you guys want to go pro? Everybody raises their hand, right? And I
absolutely.
say, okay, how many of y'all think you do everything it takes to be a pro? And maybe you have, one or two guys who don't end up raising their hand. Everybody does as well, but then I really talked to them about the process of understanding, like, it doesn't matter like if you love the weight room or not, but you have to respect it. You have to understand that
Yeah,
this is something that's going to take you to the next level. And like I'll never forget when I was with the New York Jets first day, we had a player not pass a conditioning test. Free agent, everybody was really excited to sign, got cut first day. Because it was you didn't take care of your business, right? And it's
businessman.
a business at that level. So I think it does. You do a disservice to athletes if you don't treat them like pros, and they don't understand that it does take a certain level of work to get that done. you know
Yeah,
into
absolutely.
that competition piece too. Like I always just let them pick the music for the day.
Oh
Whoever
yeah,
wins the
nah,
most
yeah,
gets to pick the music.
yeah,
So we, if some guy's on a hot streak, then we end up listening to I mean, it ends up usually being Gunna most of the time, and
New
then
Gunna album just on repeat the whole time for
oh
5 hours
yeah,
straight.
that's
Yep.
exactly it. I
Oh
can
yeah.
I can do every single thing. I can rap every single song at this point for sure. So
Oh yeah. But back to what you're saying, man. I just feel like having a competitive atmosphere in everything you do will kind of help those guys kind of get up to speed. And again, they'll get weeded out as if they needed to. But yeah, just competitive atmosphere 24/7.
mhm.
So
Our big quote for our team is, "We don't become you, you become us."
yep,
You
I love
become a
that.
part of this environment. You
I
have to
love that.
fit in with us, because if you want to work with our guys who've been working hard for all these years, you have to match that same level of work
Oh yeah,
ethic. You know.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
so I want to take it back a little bit. Dave Scholes and Joey Burgles, these are kind of big names within the football training field, especially Joey with his kind of success on social media. You know, I think most people are aware that that's mostly a Charles Poliquin philosophy and program that they implement. Can you kind of tell me the biggest things you took away from those programs, and then what you still implement today from those programs?
Yeah, so going into my internship with Dave Scholes and Joey and all them, I was very kind of dumbfounded because I personally can't squat that low. I've never really been able to squat that low. So I see all these guys, wiping their butts on the platform. I'm like, oh my goodness, like what does it take to get this way? But it's just different. The deep ranges of motion is something I just had never been exposed to at the time. So I had a lot of questions, but I think the biggest thing I took away is that it's a very good idea to work through full ranges of motion, especially early on, just to build a good base of just mobility, flexibility, and strength through all ranges. I feel like that actually translates into things later on when you want to start doing partial range of motion or more explosive movements. I think it really gives you just a good base, and that's it. My knees have felt a lot better doing it. I know it's very anecdotal, and you can ask, all these researchers. But for me personally, I feel that deep knee bending is absolutely crucial for knee health and just overall joint health. And again, like with the front squat, it's a front squat's an amazing movement because it just challenges you to a certain extent, especially when you start adding freehand and actually forcing guys to keep their chest upright. Elevating the heels, and it really shows you like where these guys are deficient in certain aspects of their body, whether they have bad ankles, whether their knees are bad, whether their hips are bad, thoracic, you name it. So that's really where I kind of got the using the front squat as a screening tool, just to kind of really gauge athletes, was coming from Dave Scholes. And I'm telling you, they're very strictly regimented with their approach. Like they will keep guys on slam boards doing freehand front squats for 6 weeks. But again, it pays dividends when you start getting in season and you have the ability to squat deep if you need to, and you also have the ability to do partial ranges when you need to. And they're also very big on FRC, which is a huge rabbit hole that we can go down to if you really want to. But I don't think we have enough time for that. But
It'll take a
you
couple
know,
days.
yeah, they introduced me to this FRC system, and my mind was blown when I first did it. I do think it can get overstretched sometimes because there's just so much terminology and different ways to do things. It's very hard to implement into a program, especially like basketball, where we have so many moving parts going on, especially in season. But I do think they're great for recovery. A huge believer in make sure your internal rotation is top notch. Dorsiflexion, shoulder internal rotation, all things like that. So just really understanding the body more is really the biggest thing I kind of took away from that. It usually just all about like getting strong, getting strong, getting strong. But with Dave, it was like, all right, man, like how can we get this knee moving the way this knee needs to actually be moving? How do we get this ankle to where it needs to be? How do we get the shoulder the way it needs to be? And understanding, the actual like planning of it. Because, things like this that you can't adapt in about 2, 3 weeks. It's a very long process that you have to be very consistent in. So I
Mm.
think that's probably the biggest thing I took away. It was just kind of looking at things from a very much more minute kind of lens, more detailed oriented, I guess I would say. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I took away from being with Dave.
It's funny that you mentioned the front squat, because when our athletes do talk about mobility work, they're like, what kind of mobility do we do? And I'm like, well, you put the bar on your chest and you squat down. That's usually
That's
going to get you more
mobility.
mobile.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, obviously, I'm a big believer in the full range of motion as well. It's something I really, really implement, especially during our GPP phases. Like right
Yeah.
now, I'm big on the heel lifts. I'm not very concerned about, ankle mobility at that specific time, because I do want to make sure we can go through the full range of motion, be strong for those full range of motion. And then I always feel great when I see a little snapshot of, like Kobe in a deep, deep lunge,
Yeah.
on the court. And I'm like, yes, yeah, I'm right. Just
Oh
reaffirming
yeah.
what I believe. So,
Oh yeah. I will say though, with the FRC stuff and all that, I do hate the trend that's going around where like people are starting to like use injuries or like certain positions that
mm,
players get into to justify their programming. Like, yeah, maybe you'll be exposed to those certain ranges, but those are also freak athletes too. And
Hmm.
people use like, oh, hey, this person got injured this way. This is why we do this and that. And I hate that they try to correlate the two, because injuries are just a freak thing. You really can't. I mean, for being honest, you really can't truly prevent all injuries.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I just kind of hate how that's kind of turned into a thing now.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. And
Yeah.
it's profiting off of somebody's, you know, like failures. And failure is a
Yeah.
bad term to use for it, right? But some of their lowest moments, right? And I mean, we both work with athletes extensively. Everybody who listens to this podcast has worked with an athlete. A lot of them, their identity is being an athlete.
Yeah.
So imagine losing your identity. You're no longer able to play because of a severe injury, and then all of a sudden you have somebody on Instagram saying, "I can prevent this from happening."
Yeah,
It,
man.
it, it really it's sickening to me, to be honest. And it
Yeah.
gets frustrating when I see people try to sell programs like that. And that's
Yeah.
also a big thing I tell recruits too. I'll be honest with them about what our program does and what it can't do, because
Yeah.
if I sit here and I promise you you're not going to have any injuries, you should turn right around in that weight room, go find
Yeah.
another school. And that's why I tell them straight up. I'm like, if somebody tells you this, like, they're not being truthful with you. I'm going to
Yeah.
do everything I can to prevent injuries as much as possible. We do our NOR testing, force plate testing, all these things, right? But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that I'm not lying to you or setting unrealistic expectations of what you can get out of this program.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No.
Absolutely.
All right, Damian. Well, hey, man, it's been fantastic to have you on. I really appreciate hearing all the things about your philosophies, and especially speaking from basketball to basketball. I do want to open the floor. Is there anything that you wanted to discuss or kind of talk about before we wrap it up?
You tell me, man. You're over here, the TikTok star, the guy on social media, man.
Hey, man.
I don't know, man. What kind of advice would you give to any strength coaches trying to kind of expand their reach social media wise? Because I feel like that's a very good avenue for strength coaches to get paid, man. This is a very underpaid field, in my opinion, and I just
Mm.
feel like that kind of adds just more revenue streams to just potential coaches. So, just kind of tell me your experience, man. I was there during the inception of the whole TikTok deal, so just kind of
Yeah.
tell me how you kind of built up to where you're at, man. And just kind of the journey about it.
Yeah, but look, I like this. You flipped it completely on its head, man.
Yeah, I got you.
You're the interviewer now. Look at that. So a little bit of Inception like, but
Okay.
I think the biggest thing is, number one, not caring what other people say, right? We both worked with Darby Rich. Darby never once like meant deep down like in his heart to be, mean or anything like that.
Oh
But he
yeah.
called me the TikTok king and make fun of me and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
But then he'd slowly kind of be like, also like, well, I didn't know you had these, certain brand deals or things like that. And he's like,
Yeah.
you're the smart one because you're finding a way to maintain your income, through the highs and lows of strength and conditioning, like you said. So I think one is don't care what other people think, as long as you're posting high quality information and high quality content that can really help people, then that's the biggest thing, and then number two, I would say just be consistent with your posting. A lot of we can get funky with the algorithms too on TikTok and Instagram and
Yeah.
all like that, but they reward people who post consistently. So consistently post. And then also, I think like a huge thing too is you really have the opportunity to grow the love for strength and conditioning or shoot it down completely.
Mm.
I think I get questions all the time, like, is pay really that bad for strength coaches?
Yeah.
Um, are your work hours really that horrible? It's usually kind of negative things that people hear a lot or talk about a lot. I think my biggest thing with that is I want to be truthful with them because, there are 80, 90-hour weeks, that's just the nature
Yeah.
of the game. But
Yep.
also during the summer, I mean, I'm pretty much out of the office every day by 3 p.m.
Yeah.
So it all eventually balances out. So I think understanding that there is a certain weight to it, like, there's a lot of high school people on social media. There's a lot of people who are interested in the field and then trying to understand what it entails with the field. So being honest and being transparent, and I think that's a big thing too. Like, people know when you're faking. People know when you're trying to put up a front of like, man, I'm like the hardo strength coach, or
Yeah.
like I'm the strength coach's best friends with all my players or anything like that. Like people can see that. People know, just like athletes can know if you're being genuine as well. So I would say be genuine with your posts, be truthful, be consistent, and just don't worry about what other people think.
I like it.
There
I'm
you
writing
go.
all this down, by the way. I'm just
I
writing
know.
my
I
notes
can. I
down. I
can see
got
you.
you.
I can
Got
see you
it.
scribbling
Right.
down over there.
Oh yeah.
So awesome. Well, thank you, Damian, very much for coming on. It was awesome to catch up with you, man.
Appreciate you, man. Call me later.
All right. You know I will.
All right,
Bye
man. I
bye.
appreciate you again, man. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Yes, sir.